Hello, everyone. If you'll turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. We'll begin in verse 22. We're going to look at a very familiar or famous miracle of Jesus today, and it's when Jesus walked on the water. This is, one of the most famous of all of Jesus' miracles. You have the raising of Lazarus, feeding of the 5,000, and maybe this one. Those are like the top three probably that people know about and know the story. Today in the story, we'll want to focus obviously on Jesus, but on Peter too, and his what he does in this story. This is not a story about risk taking or doing something stupid. This is a story about obedience, about asking God to do something or Him asking you to do something and then you doing that. There are sometimes things that we do that other people see as it's really dumb or it's really a risk. When I tell people or people find out that I went skydiving, people say that is just dumb. That's a stupid risk. And for me, I was anxious about doing this, but as I began to get prepared that day that I went skydiving, the guy that jumped with me on the tandem jump, this was on this day when he jumped with me. This was his 8,651st jump. So when I found that out, I became a little less anxious. For this guy, it's not really a risk. It's something he does every day, sometimes several times a day. I was still going to have to go through the training and putting on the parachute, getting in the plane, going up to 11,000, 12,000 feet, him hooking onto me, actually jumping out of the plane, free falling, and then pulling the chute and landing safely on the ground. Still going to have to go through those steps, and it's going to feel anxious for me. But for this, having this guy with me that knew about it, that was, my life was literally in his hands, I felt safe with this guy. For most of our life, most of us don't jump out of an airplane every day. We don't have risk-taking things that happen or things that are maybe that exciting every day. We just don't do that. Most of our life is routine. You get up, you go to work, you come home, you go to sleep. You get up, you go to work, you come home, you go to sleep. You get up, you go to work, you come home. It's that way 5 days in a row, maybe 6. On your day off, you mow the yard, you get caught up on chores, and Sunday you go to church, and you do it all again on Monday. Most of our life is routine. Today we want to look at the spiritual sense of walking on the water, and how I want to talk about how it's never a risk to obey God. If He asks us to do something like this, where it's something that feels risky to us, we feel anxious about it. But if God asks us to do it, it's not a risk. He'll be there with us through the whole thing, even though it might be a new experience for us, and we might be afraid, might be nervous, but it's never foolish to obey God and to do what He asks us to do. God will never ask us to do something foolish, to do something dumb. God's not going to ask me to, trust me, jump out of the airplane with no parachute. That's just dumb. He's not going to ask you to go get on the top of a building and jump off. And you say, I'm fearless. It won't hurt me. That's just dumb. That's not smart. God will never ask us to do things like that. In the miracle today, Peter is often criticized for his lack of faith, and because he began to sink at a point in this story. But Peter was the only one who asked Jesus to get out of the boat. He was the only one who Jesus said, yes, you can get out of the boat. He was the only one to let go of the boat and get out. The other 11 stayed in the boat. Maybe they thought, we'll do this next time. After it was over, they thought, next time I get the chance for this, I'll do it. But there was never another opportunity. This was the only chance these guys ever had to do this. Maybe if one of the others had said, can I come out? Jesus would have said yes, but nobody else asked to come out. Before we read the text, I want to set the scene for kind of where the disciples are and Jesus and what they're doing here. If you look at the first part of Matthew 14, verses 1 through 14, you have the murder of John the Baptist. King Herod has granted a request here to have John the Baptist's head brought in on a platter. He does it. And Jesus and the disciples kind of, verse 13, it says they heard about this and they withdrew to a solitary place to mourn about this and to talk about it. And then you have the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. The people follow them. They hear about where they were, and Jesus feeds the 5,000. And so if you kind of take all of that's gone on with Jesus and the disciples, and you get to verse 22, you think, man, that's the long day. They had a lot of drama, with the John the Baptist dying, and them kind of talking about that, and then the miracle of the 5,000, feeding the 5,000 plus. A really dramatic day. It's been a long day. And then you get to verse 22 of Matthew 14. Let's read the story. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up to a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against them. During the fourth watch, or about 3 to 4 a.m., during the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter said, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he began to sink, and he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him and said, why have you of little faith? Why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. You see, the first word in verse 22 is immediately. After feeding the 5,000, and Jesus sends the disciples off. And then you see it says he dismissed the crowd. But then you see another phrase there. Jesus made the disciples get in the boat. It was Jesus' instructions to get in the boat and go to the other side of the lake. And then you see that they get into a storm here. One thing we can take note of here is obedience to God's commands do not mean we won't ever experience a storm. They were doing exactly what Jesus told them to do, ran into a storm. Jesus sent them out knowing this storm was coming. Jesus knew the storm was coming. He is aware that is coming. He's away from the disciples for a little bit, but it's probably storming where he is. And he's delaying his return to teach them a lesson. In verse 24, end of verse 24, it says, they were a considerable distance away. In John's account of this, he says that they were about 3 miles out. In my Bible, it says the boat was buffeted by the waves in the wind. The King James, I like what it says there. It says it was tormented by the wind. This is not a shower or a little drizzle or a little rain coming down and a little breeze. This is a violent storm that the disciples are going through. The disciples are probably just trying to stay afloat. Have to remember, most of these guys are seasoned fishermen, and so they know about being in a boat, and probably not their first storm to be in. Also remember that there's 12 guys in the boat, so this is probably a larger boat. It's large enough to carry 12 grown men. I assume that they left shore before dark in order to get to the other side before it gets dark. I don't know if they have any kind of lighting, a lantern or anything on the boat to see where they're going, but I assume they left before, in time enough to get to the other side before dark. They fight the wind and the waves here probably for a long time before Jesus comes to them. Verse 25, it says it was the fourth watch, and that's translated to 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, and they're way out there at across the lake. These are the worst possible conditions. It's dark, it's raining hard, the wind is blowing hard. If you've ever been out in a boat on a lake in a storm, it's scary. And these guys were really afraid. It says that Jesus went out to them. Verse 26, when the disciples, in the end of verse 25, Jesus went out to them, and it says, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake. Again, remember, this is wind, waves, and dark. Apparently, there's some kind of moon or light, or either Jesus is glowing in some way, because they see a figure on the lake. Also remember, it's not calm conditions. Sometimes we want to think about Peter and Jesus walking on a calm glass-like lake. This is wave walking. This is not just walking on the water. They're walking on waves. So whatever the ideal conditions for walking on the water are, this is not it. And I think this is interesting to note too here that this is another time, well, a rare occasion where Jesus sets aside his humanity to do something godly in his body, as far in a physical way, for him to walk across the water. But being Jesus Christ, that's the way that he gets to them. He could have just snapped his fingers and been in the boat, but he decides to come across this way. Verse 26, you see that in the middle of the verse there it says, they were terrified, and they said it's a ghost, and they cried out in fear. Now again, remember, these are 12 grown men. Most of them big, burly, tough guys. So, and they're crying out in fear. It's almost funny, but it's not. They think it's a ghost, and then they somebody seems to recognize that it might be Jesus, you know, and we maybe want to criticize the disciples and say, shouldn't you have been looking for Jesus? coming across to save you. But maybe we can put ourselves in that situation. You know, how many times are we in trouble? We're in a storm. We cry out in fear. We're nervous. We're anxious. We do stupid things when we should be looking for the answers that Jesus has coming our way. Sometimes we're in a storm and we're not looking for him. Verse 27, Jesus says, "It is I." Or he says, "Hey guys, it's me." And maybe he says it in a way so they can hear his voice, and he's close enough where they can see that it actually is him. Verse 28, Peter speaks up, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come." You know, Peter is famous for spouting off at the mouth and saying things very quickly without thinking. And maybe the other disciples roll their eyes and say, "Here we go, Peter's going to do something dumb." Or maybe somebody grabs his shirt and says, "Sit down, boy, you can't walk on the water." But now this is where I want us to put ourselves in the boat as Peter, put ourselves in his shoes. You know, sure, it's storming, but isn't it safer to stay in the boat than to be out on the lake? Peter doesn't think so. He thinks it's safer to be in the storm on the water with Jesus than it is to be in the boat. Logically, maybe we're thinking, well, but Peter's got it right. It's safer to be out there with Jesus than to be in here with these other guys who are crying out in fear. Verse 29, Jesus says to Peter, "Come on." And Peter has to let go of the boat. He has to let go to go out there. Jesus calls Peter to do something he's never done before. Peter's never walked on the water. Nobody else has either. He's asking him, or he's granting this request to come out there. And because Jesus says, "Come," because Jesus is out there with him, zero risk. Zero. The other 11 may look at it that were there and say, "Man, this is dumb. That's a risk I'm not taking." But because Jesus made the call, and because Jesus is there, zero risk. No risk involved. Even if you start to fail, Jesus is right there with you like he was with Peter. Remember, again, these are not calm conditions. This is wave walking. Sometimes we picture this story, I think, a lot, and we think it's just walking on a calm pool across there. But Peter gets up, steps out, and walks on the water toward Jesus. You see in verse 30 that, "But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink." He saw the wind. He took his eyes, when he first got out, apparently he just looked straight at Jesus and focused on him. Apparently he loses his focus, focuses on the outside things that are coming at him. Like I said, Peter often gets criticized for his lack of faith. And because he saw the wind, because he saw the waves, because he sank, he's a failure. But, you know, think about it. Is Peter a failure because he sank here? Yes, his faith did, yes, he did get scared. Yes, he did get afraid. Yes, he did sink. Yes, Jesus did have to save him. But I also think, no, he's not a failure because nobody else even asked to do this. Nobody else even talked to Jesus about this and wanted to have this opportunity. No one else even thought about getting out of the boat and coming toward Jesus. Only Peter knew the thrill of obeying Jesus and having this measure of faith. He's the only one. Maybe the other 11 thought, I'll do it another time. They never got another chance. Only Peter gets criticized here. The other 11 in the boat, zero. Nobody talks about them. He's the only one who gets criticized. He's the only one who ever experienced this kind of power that Jesus gave him. For Peter and for us, God doesn't test us in this walking on the water in a spiritual sense very often. It's rare. It may only happen a few times in your life where it's a rare, extraordinary thing that God asks you to do. What do? If we need to make sure that it's a call from God to come out of the boat. Make sure it's something that's in His will. It's something He's asking us to do. It's not something we want to do. It's not something somebody else wants us to do. It's what God wants us to do. Then we let go of the boat. We have to let go of the side and actually get out. We may be anxious. We may be nervous. It may feel like a risk, but obeying God is never a risk. There's always a point of decision for us. You know, we can say yes, and we experience something new. We experience power in a way through the Holy Spirit and through our obedience we've never experienced before. Our faith grows. We can say no, and we just say, I'm not ready, I'm too scared, or we just flat out disobey. Maybe we just say, well, maybe I'll think about it. Sometimes for me, more than I hate to fail, is for other people to see me fail. I played golf today and yesterday, and so it was lots of people saw me fail multiple times. So sometimes that's in our mind. We don't want people to see us do things that are not good. If you'll turn to Psalm chapter 1, I want to end with this psalm here. Peter does three things here in this miracle. At first he's sitting, then he's standing, and then he's walking. And that's what this psalm talks about. He let go from where he was sitting and stood up. And then he stepped out and walked. Psalm chapter 1, verse 1. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law he meditates night and day. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Thank you all again for watching today, and I thank you all for being faithful to participate and faithful to support me. I want to encourage you too to continue to send us your prayer requests. If there's anything you need, send those to me or Cindy, and we'll send them out to everybody. If it's something personal that you don't want everybody to know, just let us know that too, and we'll just keep it between us. But I'll see you next time.